The Long Haul Podcast, America's Irish voice. Interviews with inspiring immigrants, renowned Irish personalities, and discussions on all things Irish America. Presented by Michael Dorgan. Welcome along to this week's edition of the Long Haul Podcast. We're coming off really a disappointing weekend of sport in Irish terms. Leinster's defeat in Dublin, and of course the Katie Taylor fight in the 3 Arena. Gavan Casey from the 42.ie is back to give us a review on the night's events. Gavan, Big Time Boxing was back to Dublin. No doubt it was a great experience, although the results didn't go our way, the last 3 results on the night.
Yeah, that's it, Mike. I actually forgot this goes out in video as well, doesn't it? And you can probably see how dishevelled I am from the weekend and last week. No gel in the hair, wearing a tracksuit top. You're lucky I'm not in a dressing gown, to be honest. Still sort of recovering from the workload. And as you mentioned, Leinster lost as well. There's Munster in a URC final now this Saturday, so I'm sort of pivoting back to rugby for the week. But as you say, with the event itself, electrifying atmosphere. It was pretty cool to see 8,000 fans in their seats, even 3 fights out from the main event. Dennis Hogan, who was back from Brisbane fighting in Ireland for the first time in 12 years, I think, since he fought Ken Egan in the senior semi-finals in 2010. 13 years, is it? Jeez. Like, for him to have that moment in front of all of those fans chanting his name, and for, say, somebody like Thomas Carty, the Dublin heavyweight, to have, I'd say, easily 4,500, 5,000 dubs in there cheering on his knockout win. He's at a very formative stage of his pro career. Gary Coley unfortunately lost in the chief support bout. Big upset knockout defeat there, or stoppage defeat. But even for that, for a chief support bout involving a guy from Kildare who wouldn't be a mainstream name in Irish sport by any stretch of the imagination. He was previously managed by NTK Global, which sort of prohibited boxers from really gaining traction in the Republic of Ireland, at least because they couldn't fight here. There was a very bad relationship with the media, mainstream media anyway, but it felt like a main event type of an atmosphere for his fight, just absolutely spine-tingling noise. And then the actual main event ramped it up tenfold again, where you didn't feel as though it could get any louder, and it did. And it was a worthy reception of one of the greatest Irish athletes of all time, her first time fighting professionally in this country, the first time ever professionally and the first time at all since 2016. And again, fight result doesn't go our way, and it was like somebody popped a balloon as the verdict was read out and Chantelle Cameron's arm was lifted. But brilliant fight. You know, I have a tough time watching back fights where Irish fighters lose. I think when you're there covering them live, you know yourself, it's almost like the emotion is removed, because it's quite I won't go as far as to say it's a difficult thing now, let's not big ourselves up too much, but quite a maniacal, kind of a panicky sort of a thing. You're looking up, looking down, and you don't have a chance to really feel feelings, I suppose. It's just work, but the emotion does sort of seep in when you watch it back in the cold light of day. So I haven't watched the Taylor Cameron fight back, but I agreed with the scores on the night. And it was a tremendous fight. I'd imagine if you were a neutral, as I suppose you are when you're covering it, I mean, my impression was that it was just a belting fight, in fairness, and one that Cameron deserved to win.
It just in terms of the atmosphere, Gav, for our New York followers, how would you compare it to the Garden last year?
It's a funny one, and I was trying to make sense of that in my own head as I was sitting there. I guess the 3 Arena, if anybody has been in New York for years and hadn't been in the Point, say, as it used to be in Dublin, or the 3 Arena as it is now, like, it's quite a cavernous sort of a venue compared to the big room at MSG, where, like, obviously the big room there is at the very least the length of a basketball court or a hockey field rink, and you have like 4 stands, and in the 3 Arena it's almost an amphitheater sort of a setup. So it's just like one stand screaming down on the ring, and the press seats are on the other side of that then, and you have obviously ringside seats as well. But like, it was ear splitting because I think it's so small. So like, there's nowhere for the noise to actually escape. But at the same time, I found it hard to compare it to the atmosphere at MSG, because MSG just being bigger, having the Puerto Ricans there as well, and that little bit of, like, I don't know, cross-pollination or something between 2 very proud fighting countries, and trying to one-up each other with the songs and the noise. that probably felt like a more organic atmosphere in New York, whereas in the Three Arena, because it's 8,000 paddies, it's like, pumping Maniac 2000 and dance tunes that I never want to hear again. And to be fair, generating the sort of response that you're looking for, in that everybody was off their fucking heads and the noise was still electrifying. Like, different, both great but different. And if I was to pick a favorite event of the two, like, it'll be music to the New Yorkers' ears that MSG was incomparable to me. That felt like a sort of a once in a lifetime event that I was at, whereas the Dublin one felt like a really cool event to be at, but just not quite as... maybe we're spoiled as well, having witnessed something like that at MSG beforehand, right?
In terms of the fight itself, Gav, I suppose there's been few complaints that everyone kind of was unanimous in thinking that Cameron just pipped Katie in the end. What are your thoughts briefly on how the fight went? I
was surprised by the extent to which Taylor was a little bit flat looking, or maybe even seeking to conserve her energy early in the fight. That may have been a tactic, we don't know, because Taylor didn't speak to the press afterwards. Such was the heartbreak of her defeat. But I really felt as though if she was going to win this fight, she was going to have to build an early lead, get on her toes, get on her bike, really, and frustrate Cameron into creating openings and try to build a little bit of psychological pressure where when you have 8,000 people behind you cheering your every move, even if a shot misses, they're going to cheer it. It sort of will create a sense in your opponent that things are going against them and that they're sort of up against it, right? Like, and that would have been the first time Cameron would have experienced that in a professional career. But instead, in the first round, Cameron was able to close the ring off quite readily, land at will. Taylor's defense looked as bad as it's really ever been, and that's just the result, I think, of her legs. I think we mentioned it in the preview, Mike, being almost 37 years old in their own right, and having moved her around so capably for 25 of those years, really. Like, bear in mind as well, and I've never really considered this a factor until this very moment, but she also had a football career. Like, she played international football for the Republic of Ireland, so it stands to reason that her legs aren't quite as nimble as they used to be. And as much as it sounds weird, legs are almost as important in boxing as your hands. And it just felt as though Taylor's mobility was inhibited. You noticed, like, she was standing up between rounds, and again, I can't say this for certain, but I would propose that was to prevent her calf muscles from getting a little bit stiffer, sitting up, standing down 9 odd times in a fight. And yeah, like we said last week, Mike, that this was a soon-to-be 37-year-old woman who has been doing this for a long time against a fresher, bigger woman, and that's exactly what the fight looked like. So it took on the image that I'd probably foreseen a little bit, and with all of that being said, Taylor still showed glimpses of her old class, and she's never going to lose that defiance. I think that sort of alien force of will that she has in her gut that she can summon in moments of trouble will always be there, but she probably no longer has the athleticism to marry with that. And the results 96-94 by 2 and 95-95, I think 96-94 was about right, but definitely not 95-95. And there was no boos at the result, I don't think. Maybe a little bit of animosity towards Cameron, but nobody I spoke to afterwards felt as though it was unfair, and Taylor took it really well. She was magnanimous, wasn't she? Like, if you contrast that, Mike, to the reaction when she got eliminated at the 2016 Olympics, for example, and she was in floods of tears. And I know there's a caveat there in that her father wasn't in her corner, and I think that's a familial thing, which is sort of her own business, but equally she'd lost a trainer that had given a great deal to her and probably felt out of her comfort zone in that way. For example, at that time she didn't even look as well conditioned as she previously had, but this time around she just got on with it. Fair play to Chantelle. I fell a little bit short. That suggested to me that as she's coming towards the end of her career, she probably anticipated that a night like this would happen eventually. She probably didn't think it was going to be this Saturday, but she seemed to internalize it pretty quickly. And yes, she didn't speak to the press afterwards, but I always think boxers shouldn't be obliged to do press conferences after getting their brains rattled around their skull for 10 or 12 rounds anyway. Yeah,
I think she, as you said, I think she accepted that she was beaten by the better woman on the night, and maybe going back to the Olympics, as you said, there was kind of outside factors that she wasn't 100% at those games, whereas Saturday night she accepted she was beaten by the better woman. Were you surprised how Cameron kind of bossed her around the ring and Katie was on the outside on the ropes of that? Were you surprised by that, or did you expect that because she was the bigger woman?
Yeah, no, I totally expected it, to be honest. I suppose what surprised me was just Taylor's inability to get out of those situations. She was always going to get trapped on the ropes a few times, and Cameron was always going to have moments in which she'd be able to corner Taylor and cut off that ring, as I said earlier. But I was surprised by the inadequacy with which Taylor tried to maneuver herself out of those situations. And again, I just don't know if the legs could get her out of there. And sometimes it's as straightforward as that. I was saying somewhere there during the week, it's kind of Occam's razor, like, which is the most obvious solution or conclusion is the one right in front of your nose. And there's probably no need to overthink this fight. It's just, as I say, a smaller, older woman losing to a fresher, bigger woman.
Do you think a 32-year-old Katie beats a 32-year-old Cameron even at 140?
Yeah, I think so. So. I still think it would be a very tough fight at 140. I think a 32-year-old... I mean, at that time, actually, Cameron was probably at 135. So if they'd fought at 135, I think Taylor would have had her way with her. I think as recently as probably 2 or 3 years ago, if they were... even at 140, I think Taylor wins the fight maybe 7-3, 6-4, you know. I've always felt that way. People out there have always suggested, by the way, or a lot of people have suggested that Cameron was the kryptonite and that someday she was going to catch Taylor on the hop. And I actually disagreed with them, and I still disagree with them. I think Taylor Taylor was a superior boxer for a long time and just no longer is in an overall sense.
Now, where does this leave us? There's a rematch clause, obviously, straight away. Katie was saying afterwards that she was going to activate it. Eddie Hearn was saying the same thing. And you were writing on the42.ie that there could be it could be almost doubles or quits now, that Cameron might come down to 135 and challenge Katie for her belts, and Katie could in fact walk away with nothing after these two fights. Tell us what you think is going to happen over the coming months and what's Katie's next move.
I think there will be a rematch, and that will certainly be at the forefront of Taylor's mind to begin with. I don't think that she will want to do anything else other than avenge that defeat. Then it comes down to, okay, where does the rematch take place? I would say that happens in Dublin again, because Taylor has just proved that she can easily sell out an 8,000 seat indoor arena. It cost Matchroom a lot of money to stage the fight there, but it also made them a lot of money at the gate, over €2 million. The ticket prices were extortionate, and I actually think disgraceful ultimately, but they know at least that they can make their money back there, even if they're paying more on security and insurance and various things like that. Cameron doesn't have a fan base really to anywhere near the size of Taylor's. I mean, it would be fractional. I don't know that. Of course, she's probably fondly thought of in Northampton, her hometown, but she's not an especially well-followed woman, even if people in England know her. So it's just that you're rolling the dice if you try and throw them in an indoor arena in England. Chances are, I would say that if you did it in England, there'd be more Taylor fans there than Cameron's. But I think with the fact that Eddie Hearn seemed to enjoy his week in Dublin, with the fact that he got to schmooze with one of the few people in combat sports who's more famous than he is, Conor McGregor, and that McGregor actually sponsored the event as well. There are a lot of factors that I think bring it back here. And then thirdly, you have to decide at which weight the fight takes place. And as you say, they could go double or quits, which would be, you know, the highest jeopardy version of this rematch, and one in which, as you quite rightly outline, Taylor could leave with nothing. And I have to say, flip that a little bit, and if you're Chantelle Cameron, and if you come down to 135, which is quite a significant weight cut from where you're naturally at, and if you do relieve Taylor of her belts, that's a pretty badass move. Like, I don't think Cameron is the most likable boxer in the world. Maybe she's just shy or just doesn't like speaking in general. There's some quality to her that I can't really put my finger around that I think doesn't necessarily endear her to people, but in a strictly boxing sense, if she came down and did that, you couldn't begrudge her the number one pound for pound ranking and her kind of a level of greatness of her own. So that will probably appeal to her. The idea of taking everything from Taylor, given the fact that she had to wait for so long before getting that first opportunity. But equally, think of that from Taylor's perspective and the idea that Cameron thinks she can do that. And as much as I would prefer personally for Taylor to just walk away from the sport and I would have preferred for that to happen even before this fight. That is a pretty salivating narrative going into a rematch, isn't it? The idea that everything is up for grabs on Taylor's end, and that her career is actually on the line, because that's the way it would be.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, it would be quite quite exciting to see it happen. I was reading Gary Spike O'Sullivan, our fellow Cork man. There was a few others said that maybe it was an ill-conceived. It was the bad move for Taylor to move up to 140 on Saturday, and that Eddie Hearn and Brian Peters should have known better. What are your thoughts on that?
I understand where Spike is coming from, and I've heard and seen other people share that sentiment as well. I probably disagree with it, but it is totally subjective, because the way I would see it, and from what I know of Katie Taylor, she would have wanted her homecoming to be the biggest possible fight it could be. She wouldn't have been satisfied with boxing some no mark and winning an 8-2 decision or 9-1 or a shutout. I think she understood the extent to which this was going to be a landmark occasion in her career, and she wanted to mark it in a fitting way, or a way that would be commensurate to the event and that sense of homecoming. And I think it's a bit unfair to blame Hearn in it, because I know for a fact he was as surprised as anybody when Taylor actually called out Cameron at 140. Like, this was Taylor's idea. Okay, she conceived of it with Brian Peters, her management team, but my understanding of it was that she sort of led the way on this. The argument then is like, oh, should Hearn have said, no, Katie, don't do that, stay at 135? Well, maybe if he was her uncle or something, but he's her promoter who's there to make money. He's made her a lot of money as well, by the way. And from his point of view, of course, that was a really enticing idea. So if you're expecting like total morality from a boxing promoter, you're probably following the wrong sport. Spike will know that as well himself. He's come across enough dodgy characters. And my personal view on it is this, Mike. If you've gotten to where Katie Taylor has in life and done all she has in boxing, I don't think there's anything wrong with challenging yourself and finding out that it was one challenge too many, or it was a little bit too far of a challenge, because ultimately it is only a loss. Like, she hasn't gotten to where she is by taking the easy route ever, really. And I also would say she probably wouldn't even, she would literally, but like in a virtual sense, probably wouldn't get out of bed for anything less than that at this point. She knows she's coming towards the end. She only wants the biggest possible fights that will actually extend her legacy. And fighting some mandatory defence or voluntary defence in Dublin would do nothing for her legacy at all, really.
Yeah.
There's a wider conversation about what that would have contributed to Irish boxing, because if she had fought somebody and won easily, and if the undercard had gone well, maybe you sort of create a scene there. But I would say on the flip side of that, Katie Taylor owes nothing to Irish boxing, and she is within her rights to look after herself first and foremost, take the biggest possible fights if that's what she wants to do.
Yeah, there was always nowhere for her to go at lightweight, like you could argue. And we spoke last week on the podcast about her legacy and how she's pushing that envelope always, and she wants the biggest fights. She's always said it. And that was just an example last week. Maybe she might be able to redeem herself the next time against Cameron. And where does that leave us? You had mentioned last week, Gav, that Vegas could have been an opportunity, a possibility. Is all that out the window now? Are we looking at going to be either the UK and Ireland? And where does the Serrano kind of rematch mix into all this? Is that going to be next year at best, if it does even happen?
Yeah, I think so. I think all of that is on the back burner now, and you'd have to say, Mike, it may never happen, in the sense that I would say the likelihood is that Taylor would lose a rematch as well, just with an extra bit of passing of time. The fact that she's just been in another war, that's not going to improve her as a fighter, right? Now, I'm sure there are tactical adjustments that she'll feel she can make with her trainer, Ross Enamai, and there are probably elements of their approach to the fight that they may feel they got a little bit wrong. But even if she won a rematch with Cameron, which again is conceivable, particularly if it was down at 135, then you have a trilogy fight, right?
Yeah.
That's then the biggest fight in women's boxing, and it just works out that way. Now, could you argue that maybe you first go after somebody like Serrano? It's a possibility, but it would definitely be next year. I'd say a Serrano fight, I don't know, actually. I couldn't answer sort of concretely as to what happens after a rematch, because there's so many variables. Like, say if you wind up fighting Cameron in England and you win, do you then try to bring Serrano to Dublin, for example? But if you wind up fighting Cameron in Dublin in the rematch and you win, then you probably go to America to fight Serrano. You know what I mean? There were just a lot of variables and permutations, but Taylor herself will only be looking at the very next one, which is a chance to avenge the first defeat she's suffered in 7 years.
Yeah, definitely want to follow, and we'll definitely be following it here, Gav. You also just mentioned there on the 42.ie that like big time boxing was back in Dublin, and it felt that everything was kind of back and on the way up. But you also said there was a sense that it could have been the beginning of the end. Will you go through what you meant by that in terms of the big time boxing coming back to Dublin?
Yeah, I suppose like if I'm thinking of the right paragraph there, like I meant it. There was a sense last week that it could be the start of something for Irish boxing, in the sense that if you had, say, a big win for Gary Cully in the co-main event, or excuse me, the chief support, like there's a slight distinction there, but the second last fight, basically, that maybe he comes back and eventually fights for a world title at the 3 Arena at some point next year, like that he gets to he gains that exposure in front of an Irish audience, and then gets the opportunity to fly the flag and almost build a scene under him in Dublin. And like with the fact that mainly with the fact that he lost, to be totally honest, it sort of reduces the reasons for which Hearn would actually come back to Dublin. Like there's nobody else he has on his books that would make for a headliner in Dublin at the moment outside of Katie Taylor. And if you actually expand it a little bit, there probably aren't too many in the professional ranks currently from Ireland. Like there are plenty of lads in Belfast, for example, but I don't know that it's necessarily a dream of theirs or a mission of theirs to headline at the 3 Arena, right? And equally, like they may not quite have the fan base throughout the rest of the country to fill it out. So I'd say maybe there's not quite the depth of talent at the moment that you could say conclusively that it would be worth building a scene in the 3 Arena again, the way Bernard Dunn did in the 2000s with Brian Peters at the helm back then. So by the end of something, I kind of mostly meant the end of Katie Taylor, and not conclusively, but certainly sliding in that direction, right? And it may be the end of the idea that we will have big time boxing back here for the medium term, because there are loads of fighters, you know of them. Callum Walsh on the West Coast over there, Paddy Donovan on the undercard, trained by Andy Lee with a nice reception, and he's building pretty nicely if he can gain a little bit more activity. He just signed with Matchroom, he's left Top Rank, so he'll be built a little bit more on this side of the Atlantic, which I think is positive. But like he's not anywhere near ready to headline at the 3 Arena, right? He's probably two and a half years out from that. So I just mean over the next 2 or 3 years, we probably have to wait again for somebody to emerge as a bit of a flag bearer or a poster boy or poster girl for the sport in this country. And I really mean south of the border, and let's not get into a fucking political discussion. Like I just mean like a Dub or somebody from Cork or somebody like that who could definitely headline in Dublin, versus like some of the brilliant fighters in Belfast who are good enough to headline a show, but again may not really want to or seek out Dublin as an option.
I saw Jason Quigley was putting his name forward there on social media as the biggest Irish draw. Where do you think the likes of him and Michael Conlan fit into the ranks of Irish boxers and our best boxers at the moment?
Quigley could do it if he beats Edgar Berlanga in his next fight, which is over in MSG. And I don't think it's inconceivable actually that he beats Berlanga. He's been brought in effectively to lose. Like Matchroom were looking to build Berlanga, and because I guess Quigley's last major fight was his world title defeat to Demetrius Andrade. I always say Andrade, but I guess the Yanks tend to bastardize pronunciation sometimes, so he's Andrade, always has been. He's probably getting brought in as a bit of a soft touch, and I don't see him being that at all actually. And if he was to win that, he's probably in a world title picture. And like Quigley has the profile in Ireland, I think, through brilliant interviews, his contributions on radio stations, on the 42 and various places over the years, where he could do it. But like, again, he's 31 now, or maybe 32, Jason. I think he's a year on me. And if he fights in the 3 Arena even once, like I think it would be just once. I'm talking about somebody who could do it with regularity the way Dunn did. That's how you create a scene. You know what I mean? Because you need to give the undercard fighters exposure to that audience with regularity, not just one-offs. And with Michael Conlan, like, listen, he's headlining in Belfast literally this weekend in a world title fight, massive fight for him. And his father's from Dublin. He's certainly a big enough name all over the country, I think, where people would flock to the 3 Arena for a big fight involving him. I'd say the complications, again, with the former association with MTK, who managed him for a while, and the headlines that it would lead to might dissuade him from ever pursuing that avenue. And as well, like, when you can headline in Belfast, your actual hometown, why would you bother going to Dublin? Your dad's from there in Conlan's case, but like, it's not really a good enough reason when you can pack out the exact same sized arena on your doorstep. You know what I mean? So, those are 2 guys, brilliant fighters. They have fan bases, great personalities, a lot of charisma, etc. But again, it's like, can somebody do it every 3 or 4 months? And at the moment, the answer is no. Yeah.
Does Conlan get the job done this weekend?
I've actually no clue. I think it's the bookies see it as a 50-50 fight, and I do too. I personally, is it good enough to do it? Absolutely. He'll have the fans behind him. The only thing is, his opponent, Alberto Lopez, seems absolutely impervious to being the away fighter, a little bit like Cameron on Saturday.
Yeah.
I don't think the atmosphere will do anything to, what's the word I'm looking for? Intimidate him. And he's brilliant. So it's just a cracker of a fight. I'd back Conlan because I think he has the superior boxing ability just about, and I think he'll have learned lessons from that Lee Wood fight where, in terms even of his conditioning and trying to conserve a tiny bit of energy for the final stretch. So yeah, I think he may just get it done.
Well, just mentioning Cameron there, Gav, before you go, she was, like, we all focus on Katie, but she was a class act. She took it all in her stride last week. She didn't say too much in the leading up to it. Like, she was the away player, if you like, coming in, kept her head down, and Katie must have been standing on that stage for maybe 10 minutes when she came out, and Cameron got the job done. Like, she was beaten up. It was a close fight, like, although it was comprehensive, the decision, there was a lot of damage done to her face, but Cameron, you have to give kudos to her. She came there, she had a job to do, and she did it.
Yeah, she came, saw and conquered, didn't she? And it probably leaves a bit of a sour taste that I don't know, an ex-MTK English fighter coming over and being the one to inflict the first professional defeat on Taylor would probably never quite sit well with me, but shit happens, Mike, I suppose. Like, you're dead right to point out, though, her composure. Like, she talked about cool heads in a hot kitchen, and that's what she was. And I would say, like, just a final point on her is that she hasn't always been that way. Like, I spoke to people who knew her as an amateur where she didn't quite make the 2016 Olympics, and it was the World Championships that year were the final qualifier. I think she got knocked out in the quarterfinals, if I'm not mistaken, but to a Kazakh possibly. But people were saying to me, like, yeah, she imploded. Like, the pressure got to her. And you'd have to credit her trainers, Jamie Moore and Nigel Travis, and the people involved in her team, because they made such a concerted effort to reassure her all week. And I actually thought it was a sign of mental fragility, the fact that they had to do that. And to be honest, I think it is a sign of that. But I think in doing that, they actually imbued her mentally. Like, and I think they have now quite a mentally strong athlete on their hands. And I would say a lot of that is through their own creation. Look, they're 2 trainers who, like, it's the same with every boxing trainer in the world. Like, we say, like, styles make fights, and sometimes personalities, like, will just blend between fighter and trainer, and a trainer will get something out of a boxer that maybe even a superior trainer hadn't been able to. You know what I mean? Because I would say Shane McGuigan, who used to train Cameron, is definitely a better technical trainer than Jamie Moore, in my opinion. But Cameron and Shane McGuigan had quite a high profile falling out, and I know, like, in the McGuigan's gym or wherever Shane is involved with a fighter, it's like, almost army levels of intensity. It's heavy sparring, it's no BS, and it's quite like it's very technical and scientific, but it's work, you know what I mean? Whereas in Jamie Moore's gym, it's a lot more jovial, it's a lot more about being pals, and that just seems to work for Cameron. And she probably has found two guys in whom she can trust, where she didn't feel as though she had that relationship with Shane McGuigan. So credit to the trainers, credit to Cameron. They came into Dublin, they got the job done, and they disappointed all of the rest of us.
I pulled up on the side of the road somewhere between Arizona and New Mexico to watch the fight with Laura. We were watching stream you, but I Katie seemed to spend forever up on the stage. I know you're supposed to soak in the atmosphere of your homecoming. It kind of struck me that she might have been up there too long. I don't know if you take your eye off the ball, because that first round, she went down the first round possibly. Any thoughts on that, Gav? Just something
I don't think it was the case, honestly. Yeah. Because how long was the ring walk at MSG? It did take an age as well, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I think because, as I think we outlined last week, she's fought in an Olympic final in front of a venue full of Irish fans that at that time had been expecting her to win Olympic gold since it became an Olympic sport 3 years earlier. There was never anything other than outright expectation that she was going to do that, and that was an enormous pressure for her to take into the ring as somebody in her mid-20s at the time, I guess. She fought at MSG. The ring walk was even more bombastic and more dramatic, I felt. I don't know about durations, but she walked pretty slowly to that ring in MSG, right? You remember she was sort of turning around and taking it all in. I think she was just doing the same thing again, and I genuinely don't think there was any part of the occasion that got to Taylor. I think, again, Father Time may have just got her. And as they say in boxing, time is undefeated.
Yeah, true. Gav, thanks very much. If anyone wants to read back on Gavin's analysis, it's on the42.ie, and you'll also have rugby coverage this weekend, hoping that Munster get the job done this weekend. Gavin, thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back in the future.
See you soon, kid. Enjoy the rest of the halls.
Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka?
And that's all for this week. Let us know what you think by leaving us a comment on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at The Long Haul Podcast, or visit our website, thelonghaulpodcast.com. We'd appreciate if you could rate and subscribe to the podcast. This would ensure that we can get even more episodes to you more often. Slán go fóill, and thanks for listening.
And when we got inside the house, the drinks were passed around. The liquor was so awful strong, my head went round and round to me away. You Santy, my dear Annie. Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka to me way? You Santy, my dear Annie. Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka?